Today let's take a closer look at Fomapan 100. I wanted to do some more film comparisons to Tri-X like I began earlier in the year. But to keep things consistent, rather than do them every now and then, I went ahead and got 49 different film stocks. Everything I could get in 35mm from B&H and Freestyle. So unless they were out of stock, I got a roll of it. Now, if this part of the video seems familiar, it's because I'm using this portion of the video for all 49 of them rather than record it 49 times. So if you want to skip ahead to the H&D curves or the prints, time codes are right over here. For those of you that haven't seen this part of the video before, here's what I've done. So I wanted to use each film with the exact same shot, which is a headshot of me with a Kodak Gray Card Plus, which happens to have a red, blue, and green patch, a cyan, magenta, yellow patch, and then a dark and a neutral flesh tone. Then, with those shots taken, I bracketed every shot in third of a stop so that we can make sure we have a negative of equal shadow density to the base target film of Tri-X. Now, the reason I use Tri-X is because it's just been around for a long time and it's a very popular film. So it's a good base film to compare everything to. Then, once everything was developed, which was developed in D-76 at stock for the manufacturer's recommended time, I printed everything on Ilford using the exact same aperture, contrast settings, developer, and everything. The only thing I changed was my exposure time, and that was to make sure that I compensated for any base fog variation from one film stock to another. Other than that, everything was left the same so that we can have a comparison of just the qualities of the film. Now, there's going to be some differences in contrast, especially on the high end, and that's because the manufacturers getting their development time may not have used the same target that Kodak used for Tri-X. And that's okay. We're not looking at the overall contrast for everything. What we're really looking at is grain characteristics, tonality, how the film treats the shadows versus the highlights, that sort of thing. And we're looking at spectral sensitivity, thus the Gray Card Plus, rather than just a regular gray card. So we're going to go ahead and look at H&D curves, which if you saw one of my earlier videos on sensitometry, I like to use pen and paper and make my graphs. However, my wife was really ready to make sure I was done with this project. So she put everything into a spreadsheet for you all. So even though I don't like them, I want to show them to you thanks to her. Then we're going to go ahead and look at the prints side by side with the same print made from Tri-X. And from there, you can decide if you like the film and if you want to go and use it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the curves and then we'll go to the prints. Tri-X represented here in blue, Fomapan 100 in the red. Now this curve looks a lot like some of the other films we've seen before. We have a nice smooth toe pointing upwards. Pretty typical. It actually looks like it has a slightly steeper curve than the Tri-X, which means we may see a slight increase in separation of the shadows. Nice good straight line through the middle. Not a whole lot of bumps or valleys or anything like that. But then we have this graceful arc of a shoulder at the top. And it's actually a pretty long arc. So I think what we may see is less than stellar separation of the highlights, particularly at the very top end of the highlights. But overall, it's not a bad curve at all. It's not exactly a straight line with that slow shoulder, but it's certainly not the worst film we've seen either. So let's go ahead and look at the prints and see how this plays out in the real world. Here we have our Tri-X 400 and Foma 100. Now this is Foma exposed at 100. It is a bit overdeveloped. Again, as I said previously, this was developed at the time provided by Foma, but I feel like it is a bit hot. Now, of course, it depends on what they were trying to achieve. This could be a time better suited for Foma paper as opposed to the Ilford that I'm using here, but since I've never used Foma paper, I can't make that determination. At least with this combination, it's a bit too high contrast. But again, that's just a matter of development time. I am getting full shadow detail equal to the Tri-X, so I am getting at least full exposure rated at 100. Development time then could just be tweaked a little bit to bring down those highlights and get a more equal tonality to Tri-X. That being said, let's go ahead and just look at the overall print qualities here. So my tones are pretty even all the way down. I'm getting just a touch darker on the dark flesh tone than the primary colors, but otherwise it's pretty much on par with the majority of panchromatic black and white film. Nothing unexpected, particularly like the Ferrania P30 film, which was a real strange effect. Alright, other than that, it's still pretty good overall. So let's go ahead and just look at the finer details and see how it compares up close. Alright, when we look at this film up close with the Tri-X, I'd have to say I'm very surprised that the grain, while being a 100 speed film, isn't as different from the 400 of Tri-X as I would have expected. It is smaller, it is a little bit smoother, but it's not as big a difference as I anticipated. When all of these different ones are complete, I will probably show all the 100 speeds together and all the 400 together. That's of course on down the road in the future, but this is definitely, I think, bigger grain than we have seen in T-Max 100 and some of the other fine grain 100 speed films. So just a surprise there that it's not as fine grain appearance as I would have expected for a 100 speed film. Looking here on the edge of the shoulder where it meets the background, and again that smooth tonality of the background, we can really see the same kind of grain pattern pretty well. It's a lot closer than I would have liked, but we are getting nice sharp detail. And here we are getting nice sharp detail in the color. We do definitely have some brighter highlights along that shoulder because the stitching is not as, here we are. Stitching is not quite as apparent in contrast as on the Tri-X, but again, that's more development time than anything, and not anything negative against the film itself. And here in the close-up of the facial features, we do have pretty good tonality in the hair, in between the eyebrows, in the eye socket, and so forth. We just are losing our highlight detail where we're getting that overdevelopment. It could also be maybe a little bit of shouldering in the highlights where they're not separating as well, but we shouldn't, if this were properly developed, or at least developed to the same contrast index or gamma as the Tri-X, we wouldn't be as bright of a white on the skin as we are. If it were shouldering, then it would pretty much just be a flat contrast as opposed to a high contrast. So in this case, it's pretty safe to say this is less curve characteristic and more just development time. But that's an easy fix. Alright, so that's pretty much it. The film overall, it's pretty good. It's nice and sharp. It has good tonality. The development time is off, but like I said, this could be a time meant for Foma papers, which I'm not using. Otherwise, good performance. A little bit grainier than I would have liked for a 100 speed film, but overall, a good result. Alright, so thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.